At a banquet, for some reason, my husband Stephen and my in-laws were ignoring me. The rest of the relatives reacted the same way. Feeling suspicious, I pretended to go to the restroom and secretly observed everyone from behind a cover. Then, I overheard a horrifying conversation. A barren daughter-in-law is an ominous presence itself. That's right. Talking to such ominous people might curse us too. It's better not to deal with her. Hearing these words, I was so angry that my body started shaking. Unforgivable. To be blamed for infertility and, moreover, to be ignored as if I didn't exist. It seems there's no choice but to carry out my plan right away. After slipping away from the venue secretly, my phone vibrated. It was Stephen on the call. "Hey! What have you done?" Stephen yelled in agony as soon as he spoke. I chuckled. "What are you panicking for? It's the truth, isn't it?" It seemed that an image I showed on the screen had driven Stephen into a frenzy. But the real counterattack starts now. I'm going to show him hell. My name is Melissa, I'm 35 years old. 9 years ago, at the age of 26, I married Stephen. We met at a party. Stephen, 2 years older than me, was very kind and we clicked immediately. As we started dating and thought about marriage, Stephen told me he intended to return to his hometown in the countryside to farm. The village, close to being a ghost town due to declining population, felt a crisis of becoming desolate. I was surprised, but eventually decided to follow Stephen's passionate request to join him. I, too, came from the countryside, albeit a different one. I had grown tired of living in an unfamiliar city. Luckily, my brother and his wife lived in my parents' house. Knowing that there was no need to take care of my parents later also pushed my decision. After that, things moved swiftly, and we got married. I quit my job and moved to this tiny village, Stephen's hometown. Though it's called a village, most of it consisted of Stephen's relatives. We lived in a large house originally inhabited by my in-laws, who then moved to a small annex on the next plot. They were cheerful and caring, always looking out for us. Farming was tough, but living surrounded by nature wasn't bad. Above all, the people of this village were kind. When I mentioned this, Stephen happily said, "It's all thanks to the Guardian." The Guardian is a statue, located in the village square. Not only in the square, but similar statues were scattered throughout the village. Some homes even had stuffed toys modeled after the Guardian. This village had its unique traditions. Everyone revered the Guardian as a literal guardian deity. According to Stephen, the Guardian never overlooked evil deeds and never forgave the wicked. That's why all the villagers were good people. Such legends are probably found in any old village. Thinking about this, I didn't dwell on it much. Life was peaceful, and I had completely forgotten about such things. But a nightmare was surely approaching. A few years after moving in, I had become accustomed to farming. Waking up early and quickly harvesting vegetables was my daily routine. Every day was unremarkable. But one thing bothered me. We still hadn't had any children. I was about to turn 30. I had always thought it would happen naturally, but recently, I started to feel anxious. This was because, after a few years, more people began asking, "Don't you have kids yet?" Each time, I cheerfully responded, "It's a blessing, but..." It's typical of an old farming village to bluntly ask such delicate questions. Everyone asked the same. Even my in-laws and occasionally an old man or woman passing by asked bluntly, "Why can't you have them?" I responded appropriately, but it gradually became annoying. One day, after a break in harvesting, I was called by my mother-in-law while drinking water. "Hey, Melissa. How are you managing your marital relations?" "What?" Caught off guard by such an absurd question, I nearly spit out water. "It's strange that you haven't had children for so many years. Aren't you satisfying, Stephen?" An unimaginable statement came from my mother-in-law, and I was dumbfounded. In a panic, I said, "What are you talking about? Please stop, that's not something people normally discuss," and abruptly ended the conversation. Yet, my mother-in-law continued, "It's important, you know," but I ignored her and stormed out of the room. I thought this village had old-fashioned values, but this is just ridiculous. It's creepy that they boldly ask about marital life. Having left the house, I decided to kill some time by walking to the square. Then, I saw someone. Could it be a neighbor? I tensed up for a moment. I was worried they might start talking about children again. But when I saw her face, I was relieved. It was Emily, a woman who lives nearby. Emily smiled shyly. I smiled back. Emily is the only person in the village who doesn't make rude remarks to me. She's about 10 years younger than me, so she must be around 20 now. Emily isn't originally from this village. After her parents died in an accident, she was taken in by her distant relative, an old lady in this village. This happened just before I came to the village. After graduating from a high school nearby, she now helps out with her grandmother's orchard. We occasionally pass each other on the street, but she's quiet and not very talkative, so we don't really converse much. She doesn't hang out with anyone, so the villagers call her an oddball. I used to think Emily was a bit dull because she didn't interact much. But now, I appreciate that she doesn't ask intrusive questions. I felt a bit cleansed thanks to Emily after the unpleasant experience with my mother-in-law. However, that didn't solve the problem. My mother-in-law, father-in-law, and other distant relatives in the neighborhood kept saying similar things. "You need to be more assertive with your husband, you need to take the lead," they would say anything they wanted. My mother-in-law then said something that gave me chills. "Last night's dinner was all vegetables. You should add more meat. Maybe adding garlic would boost Stephen's vitality. Why does she even know what we had for dinner last night? It's too nosy." Fed up, I decided to talk to Stephen about everything. "I can't take it anymore. Everyone keeps asking about when we're gonna have kids. Your mom also pressed too much into our marital life. Honestly, it's tough." Stephen, who was watching TV, responded without taking his eyes off the screen. "What are you talking about? Mom and everyone else are just worried about you." "Worried? That's prying. Doesn't she say anything to you?" "Why would they say anything to me? Infertility is a woman's responsibility, isn't it?" "Well..." Stephen casually said something unbelievable. I was shocked that he had such outdated knowledge. I was appalled. "It's not always the woman's fault. Sometimes it's a compatibility issue, or it could even be the man's fault." "Me? No way." Stephen looked confused, genuinely puzzled. I understand the elderly in the village having old values. But I was surprised that even Stephen, who is relatively young, thought this way. "Anyway, I want a child too. I'm thinking about getting fertility treatment. We need to find the cause before we can address it." I suggested to Stephen that we go to a doctor together. But as expected, Stephen was reluctant and made excuses. "Why should a man go to such a place?" he complained, but I managed to persuade him to agree on the condition that we go to a hospital a bit far from the village. Later, we went to a hospital in another city and both got tested. A few weeks later, when we returned to the hospital, the doctor told us a fact. "There's no issue with you, Melissa. The problem is with your husband. He does not produce sperm. He has azoospermia." The moment Stephen heard this, he exploded. "What? It can't be my fault. Are you kidding me?" Stephen suddenly stood up and started yelling. I had never seen Stephen like this before. The doctor, with a troubled look, showed us the test results on a paper. Staring at the paper, Stephen fell silent with a terrible expression. He must have been shocked. I felt sorry for him and couldn't say anything. That night, I spoke to Stephen kindly. "The doctor said if we do more detailed tests, we might find the cause and get treatment. It's a bit far, but I'll help." But Stephen just looked down and didn't reply. He probably never imagined that he could be the cause. Feeling sorry for him, I couldn't say anything more and silently left the room. But soon, I realized that feeling sympathy was a mistake as Stephen's attitude began to worsen. The cruel truth of his azoospermia seemed to have shredded his pride as a man. Perhaps in an effort to regain his shattered self-esteem, he became unusually aggressive. I was the main target of his frustrations. He criticized me for being slow at farm work, for the food not being tasty enough. He started picking fights over trivial things, growing angrier more frequently. Initially, I remained silent, thinking he just couldn't accept the test results, feeling sorry for him. But as it continued, I too began to lose my patience. Our arguments increased, turning our home into a constant battleground. Naturally, there was no intimacy, so having children was out of the question. Going to the hospital for treatment was absolutely out of the question. Moreover, the villagers still believed my infertility was to blame. The situation where I was the only one criticized remained unchanged. I wanted to tell Stephen's parents the truth, but Stephen glared at me with icy eyes, warning, "Don't tell anyone." The thought of what might happen if I spoke up was frightening. And I didn't have the courage to do it. Besides, I wasn't even sure if they would believe me. After all, everyone's thinking was outdated. The conventional belief that infertility is a woman's fault prevailed. That's probably why Stephen had reacted so violently when he was pointed out as the cause. As this life continued, I started to feel I couldn't bear it anymore. I understood he was shocked, but this was outright displacement of blame, and I felt like a punching bag. Maybe it would be better to separate. I was beginning to think that way. Half a year passed, and Stephen's snide remarks continued. By then, I had firmly decided to get a divorce. However, the problem was once again the old-fashioned mindset of the village. Divorce was seen as disgraceful. I had heard rumors of a woman who suggested divorce being verbally abused by her husband. Considering this, it was unlikely I would get easy consent. So, I thought about leaving the signed divorce papers and fleeing the village. It was a drastic measure, but I was driven to it. I began to prepare secretly so that Stephen wouldn't notice. Then, the next month, Stephen was supposed to be out of the village for the day, delivering crops. It was the perfect opportunity. But while I was packing my bags, the front door opened.
Why?
There stood Stephen, who was supposed to be out. His eyes were furious as he shouted, "Where are you going?" When I remained silent, Stephen glanced at the divorce papers on the desk.
You were going to divorce me? Are you kidding me? If people find out my wife ran away, it would be a disgrace. Don't you dare embarrass me.
It was the reaction I had expected. After a tirade of abuse, he threatened, "If you ever think about running away again, you know what will happen," and glared at me sharply. My plan had failed. I was desperate. Yet, how had he found out? I had been careful to act discreetly. From then on, Stephen's treatment of me worsened. He complained that the cleaning wasn't thorough, that just seeing my face irritated him. Any backtalk from me would lead to serious trouble.
You are the worst kind of woman, running away from her husband. The guardian sees everything. Your misdeeds will be exposed.
That became Stephen's mantra. Lately, even the mention of the guardian by the villagers started to disgust me. I had thought it was just superstition, but could that statue really be watching me? It's hard to believe that those trying to escape the village receive punishment. But the fact that my whereabouts and actions were precisely guessed was indeed true. I had become utterly frightened. Gradually, a sense of resignation began to grow within me. As time passed, I was about to turn 35. One day, Emily, who lives nearby, came to visit. "It's rare to see you. What's up?" Over time, Emily and I had started to talk a bit whenever we met. Unlike the other villagers who thrived on rumors and judged harshly, Emily never pried into my life and always treated me with unchanged kindness, the only woman who did so. "Melissa, there's something I really need to say." I was taken aback by the seriousness on Emily's face. I invited her inside and made some coffee. Then, Emily looked around nervously and gestured for me to come closer without saying a word. We entered a room that was now used as a storage room and seldom entered.
What's going on?
As I followed her in, confused, I asked her this question, and she murmured as if relieved.
We should be safe here.
Then she began to pour out her words as if a dam had burst. I can't take it anymore. This village actually. That's when she told me a shocking fact. It was about the true nature of this terrifying village. Months later. Since then, Emily and I had met secretly several times. After learning the truth about the village, we had been trying to figure out a way to escape. The truth Emily shared was shocking. Hearing such things only made me more eager to escape as soon as possible. But we needed to act carefully. If our plan was discovered, it would be over. It took time, but finally, the day to act was set. This Sunday. A banquet related to the Guardian, held once every few years, would gather all the village relatives. We couldn't miss this once-in-a-lifetime opportunity. Emily and I had discussed and done what needed to be done. Everything was prepared. All that was left was to put our plan into action. The gathering was at night. The venue was the village's only restaurant. Although the building was old, it had enough capacity to accommodate most of the villagers. Like years ago, I went there in the afternoon to help, as I had helped before. My in-laws were there, so I greeted them with, "Good morning." However, after a brief glance at me, they quickly disappeared somewhere. Maybe they were busy. Thinking so, I decided to help with preparing the food. But not just my in-laws, the other relatives too, were unresponsive to anything I asked. In fact, to be honest, they were ignoring me. Had I done something wrong? Confused, time passed, and it became night. Soon, the relatives and other villagers began to arrive. Stephen was among them. But his attitude was the same. For some reason, he ignored me. It felt like I had become a ghost. Without understanding why, only anxiety and irritation grew within me. So, I pretended to go to the restroom to secretly listen to their conversations. Then, a terrifying conversation hit my ears.
Melissa never did have children, did she? At her age, it's probably impossible now. Oh dear, an infertile daughter-in-law is just bad luck. She must be cursed by the Guardian.
My mother-in-law began with a tone of disgust, and a clearly drunk Stephen nodded in agreement.
Yeah. Talking to such an unlucky person might curse us too. It's better for everyone not to deal with her.
Of course. I made sure to inform the villagers last night. I told them that speaking to Melissa would bring the Guardian's curse, my father-in-law added with a laugh. Hearing their words, I began to shake with anger. Unforgivable. It wasn't my fault I couldn't have children. And to be deemed an ominous presence. To be ignored on top of that, is this what adults do? No matter how you look at it, this village is wrong. We should carry out our plan immediately. We intended to flee this village. But that alone wasn't enough to settle my feelings. I had to somehow strike back at them. I was resolved. Soon, Emily appeared from the venue. The timing was perfect. Without saying a word, Emily and I nodded to each other. Then, I turned off the lights at the venue. Suddenly, it was dark, and voices could be heard asking, "What happened? Is it a power outage?" Amidst the confusion, Emily tampered with a computer that was placed in a corner of the venue. Originally, there was a computer, projector, and screen set up for today's event to reflect on the Guardian and the history of the village. We decided to use that setup. After a while, a certain image appeared on the screen.
"What is this?"
Stephen screamed. My in-laws, other relatives, and villagers were also staring at the screen, causing a commotion.
"Who did this? Melissa? Where are you?"
Stephen became frantic and started causing a scene, so Emily and I decided to retreat for the moment. We discreetly left the venue and met outside. About 3 minutes had passed since we escaped when my phone began to vibrate repeatedly. It was Stephen calling relentlessly.
"Melissa! What have you done?
He screamed in agony as soon as I answered. I chuckled.
What are you panicking for?
It's the truth, isn't it?
It seemed like everyone was under the wrong impression, so I just wanted to set the record straight.
The image projected was the result of a medical examination from years ago. It was a diagnosis that confirmed Stephen's azoospermia. The large text displayed on the big screen was enough to astonish everyone present at the venue. Stephen, having his closely guarded secret exposed, was in a state of panic. He seemed extremely confused and kept shouting incoherently. He was making so much noise that I quickly hung up the phone. My phone kept vibrating afterward, but of course, I ignored it. Emily looked at me with concern.
Is everything okay? Just as I expected. But we need to push a little more.
The harm I had suffered wasn't something I could just let go of. Emily and I returned to the banquet hall together. Peeking into the venue, it had turned into a scene of utter chaos.
Is this really true? You were infertile? Stephen, it can't be.
Everyone was confronting Stephen. His face turned pale as he kept saying, "This is a lie, it's a conspiracy by Melissa," sweating profusely as he made excuses. The villagers had believed that our inability to have children was my fault, the woman's fault. But the truth was different. At the time of the examination, there was nothing about me that could cause infertility. It was Stephen's azoospermia that had prevented us from having children. Yet, without being able to tell the truth, I was blamed. I was reproached as if not having children was a sin, and my existence was ignored. The numerous verbal abuses and the painful days I had to endure were not something I could forgive. Emily and I entered the buzzing venue.
Melissa! What are you doing?
Stephen shouted at me.
Don't mess with me. Doing something like this. You'll be cursed by the guardian. You'll face terrible consequences.
At his words, I snapped. What guardian? You were just spying with security cameras. How creepy. As I said this, the room fell silent. Hitting the nail on the head, Stephen, my in-laws, and the villagers turned pale. Yes, the guardian was not a protective deity. In fact, surveillance cameras were installed inside the guardian. Cameras were hidden not only inside the stone statues around the village, but also inside the stuffed toys of the guardian that were displayed in our living rooms. These were monitored by board elders in a room at the community center, who watched the actions of outsiders. That's why my attempts to escape were well known. I had learned this from Emily on that day. About 10 years ago. Around the time Emily was taken in by an elderly woman in the village after losing her parents. Lonely Emily had once secretly followed her grandmother to work because she missed her. Her grandmother went to the community center. There, she and the elders laughed and chatted while watching the villagers through surveillance cameras. At that moment, Emily learned about the village's secret legacy of the guardian cameras. Shocked, Emily somewhat understood the village atmosphere. The reason rumors spread so quickly was this. It was bad enough to be the subject of idle gossip, but being watched while walking down the street or even inside the house was too much. Emily despised the village's tendency to invade others' privacy. Emily tried to stay out of the gossip. So the villagers started calling her odd for not joining their circle. She was fed up with the village, but she had no relatives and nowhere else to go. She had no choice but to endure life there. But one day, as her 25th birthday approached, her grandmother began pressuring her to go on arranged dates. You need to have children soon or you'll end up infertile like Melissa, she was told, and persistently pushed to marry an elderly widower living on the edge of the village. Naturally, Emily refused such an unreasonable demand. However, her grandmother began to threaten her, saying that such defiance would bring the curse of the guardian upon her. When Emily could no longer bear it, she thought of me, hoping I could help. Knowing the tragic experiences I had faced due to gossip, she approached me to escape the village together. The reason Emily had moved from the living room to another room that day without speaking was because she had spotted a guardian plushie there. I hadn't paid any attention. I thought it was just another plushie, common around the village. But there was a camera hidden inside it. It was likely installed by Stephen to monitor my activities. That explained why my every move seemed to be known. When I tried to escape, and even when my mother-in-law accurately guessed what we had for dinner. Because they were watching through the camera, it was obvious to them. I felt a chill at the sheer horror of it. My instincts told me it was dangerous to stay in this village. Taking up Emily's suggestion, we decided we must escape the village as soon as possible. We planned together. But was escaping enough? I felt I couldn't rest without avenging the years of mistreatment. I thought about it. First, I had to clear my own name. And then,
Emily! Did you talk? Traitor!
Her foster grandmother yelled furiously. But Emily glared back at her.
I appreciate that you took me in when I had no one, but I can't stand living like this. Sneaking around, peeking into other people's lives, living off gossip and backstabbing, I absolutely hate it. How could you say that?
The grandmother and the other villagers began to make a commotion. To silence them, I decided to deliver the final blow. I manipulated the computer and displayed new images on the screen. The images that appeared one after another shocked everyone. Stephen is flirting with a young woman in the village. My mother-in-law secretly added the juice of a dirty rag to the coffee she served at village meetings. My father-in-law put his hands around the shoulders and waist of a married woman. Emily's grandmother stealing vegetables from someone's garden. And almost all the villagers caught in embarrassing acts they wouldn't want to be known. Everyone at the venue was speechless. Stephen exclaimed,
"When did you take these pictures?
Why was it possible to capture such compromising photos of everyone?" Emily explained. It was impossible that all the villagers were good people. Knowing where the cameras were, they would have acted in the blind spots if they had anything to hide. We focused on the blind spots, places that were out of sight of the guardian statues and plushies, and identified the most convenient spots for misdeeds to occur, where we planted our own small cameras purchased online. Then, the village scandals just kept coming out. The villagers were naturally committing minor wrongs in places they thought were not covered by cameras. They had claimed all along that all the villagers were good people. It was truly laughable. We captured crucial moments from the camera footage and saved them. And now, we exposed those images in broad daylight. An eye for an eye. Since my privacy was violated, I did the same to them. This should teach them how deplorable it is to indulge in spreading rumors about others. The villagers fell silent in shame.
What do you mean all villagers are good people? Just a bunch of scum. You enjoy spying on outsiders and having a laugh. Give me a break. I don't want to stay in this outdated, privacy-less village for one more second.
I shouted loudly and thrust the divorce papers in front of Stephen. Caught off guard, Stephen stood frozen, mouth agape. My in-laws and villagers were also stunned. They probably never thought I would fight back. Indeed, there was a time when I almost gave up. But now, with Emily as my ally, finding a way out, I could no longer just sit back and take it. I looked down quietly at them, stunned. "Goodbye, pitiful everyone."
"Goodbye,"
echoed Emily, her gaze full of contempt for the villagers. We left the banquet hall without looking back. Once outside, we picked up 2 suitcases that we had hidden in the barn. These contained all the essentials we needed for our new lives. The divorce papers were already left at the house, and now, with these suitcases, all we had to do was walk out of the village. However, as we were leaving, I suddenly stopped in my tracks.
"What's wrong?"
Emily asked, puzzled. "I just have to do this," I said, grabbing a hoe that was leaning against a farmhouse. I headed to the square and swung the hoe with all my might. A tremendous noise erupted as the statue of the guardian was spectacularly destroyed. Of course, the surveillance camera inside it shattered into pieces as well. That was quite spectacular, Melissa. There's no point in leaving that thing intact. That felt refreshing. We laughed together. Then, we destroyed every single small guardian statue throughout the village. Naturally, we had already thrown away any related plushies inside the house. It's incredible to think how frightening this setup was. The guardian statues were originally created long ago to scare misbehaving children. The guardian will scold you if you do something bad was an effective piece of education back then. But as times changed, this method of teaching young children evolved into a tool for punishing anyone the villagers disliked. It mainly targeted people like me, who came from outside the village, and those like Emily, who did not try to blend in. Initially, it was just a way for people to gather and nitpick on those who did not conform to village norms. It probably started as just a bit of idle gossip to pass the time. However, over time, this gossip evolved into a network of surveillance cameras, ensuring constant monitoring. In this closed-off village, the absurd superstition of the guardian became a normalized justification for spying on others. Not only is it problematic to expose people's privacy, but the persistence in outdated thinking is equally troubling. The negative energy filling this warped village eventually seemed to corrode the hearts of its residents. More than any curse or retribution, I have come to find human actions far more frightening. I refuse to stay in such a place any longer. We left the backward, rotten village behind without a backward glance. Later, I heard through the grapevine that infighting had begun among the villagers after I exposed their wrongdoings. Following ugly disputes, the villagers split up. Communication completely broke down, impacting even their farming activities. Lack of coordination led to frequent mistakes, and blame shifting began. Naturally, the quality of vegetables deteriorated, and the agricultural cooperative started to complain. The village could no longer sell its produce. As a result, almost everyone fell into poverty. As for Stephen, he managed to get divorced. Worried that he wouldn't file the divorce papers I had left at home, I consulted a lawyer after leaving the village. The lawyer intervened, and it turned out Stephen did fill out and submit the divorce papers. He apparently remarried quickly because he wanted to be with the woman he had an affair with, who lived on the outskirts of the village. But with the village facing a food shortage, Stephen's household was also struggling to make ends meet. The woman he remarried eventually left him. My in-laws were also out of money and spent their days in constant quarrels. No matter how miserable they became, I could not muster any sympathy for them. I never want to have anything to do with them again, nor do I wish to remember them. As for Emily and me, we are now living peacefully in a new place. However, the journey here was not easy. Emily had no relatives, and at my parents' home, my brother and his wife were living, so I couldn't impose on them. After leaving the village, we had no one to rely on. That's why we had already started looking for jobs in secret before we left. Because of the surveillance cameras, we couldn't move around too openly. We planned our meetings in a camera-free storage shed and arranged everything via computer. This took some time, but after several online interviews, I finally found a job. My experience in clerical work before I got married came in handy. I was hired as a temporary employee, which was fine by me. We had also found a small place to live. No matter how cramped, it was far better than the village environment. Since Emily had no experience outside of farm work and was struggling to find a job, she decided to live with me in my place while looking for work. Soon after we left the village, Emily secured a job. Fortunately, being in her 20s and willing to start in an entry-level position helped, despite her lack of experience. Eventually, my hard work was recognized, and I was promoted to a permanent employee. My salary increased, and I was able to move from a small place to a condo. Subsequently, Emily became independent and moved into a nearby condo. Now, we both have made friends at work and in our community, enjoying every day. Leaving the village was truly the best decision. There was a time when I lost my husband, my home, and my job, but by having the courage to start anew, I was able to reshape my life. I wish I could tell my past self not to give up. By acting with hope and not giving up, I have achieved the life I have today. Let's leave the house now while we can. It's okay, we definitely won't get caught. Come on, you're so impatient. Everyone in the family is probably asleep by now, let's just go ahead. It was the night before the wedding, and relatives had gathered at the in-laws' house. In the midst of this, my fiancé, Sean, dashed out of the house with another woman at 1 a.m. I confirmed this while looking at my smartphone and am now secretly following them. As soon as they entered the park restroom, they began flirting passionately, exchanging sickeningly sweet words. It was clearly cheating, and I was utterly disgusted. What does he mean by "we definitely won't get caught"? I already know everything. I could have confronted them right there, but I thought it was too lenient and held back, instead taking a video through a small window in the restroom. Sean, you deceive our family, don't think you'll get away with this. You're going to regret this for the rest of your life. With a seething anger boiling within me, I prepared my revenge. The day of the wedding finally arrived. Unaware of anything, Sean waited with me to make our entrance. On the other side of the door, many people who came to celebrate with us were waiting. The venue was enveloped in a celebratory atmosphere, with guests gathered to honor our happiness. Even through the door, I could feel the guests' excitement rising.
Sarah, let's be happy together for sure,
Sean said with overwhelming emotion. Blissfully unaware, he expressed his joy to me, while I forced a smile, irritated on the inside. Of course. So many people are here to celebrate with us. While I looked at him with cold eyes on the inside, I pretended to be moved. A day we will both never forget is about to begin. Glancing at the overjoyed Sean, I straightened my back. Sean and I were engaged, but not yet legally married. He was working for a company run by my in-laws, which had fallen into financial difficulties right when we got engaged. The in-laws, including us, decided it wasn't the time for marriage and agreed to register our marriage after the company was back on track. While Sean and the in-laws were busy, all I could do was wait. Sean's hard work finally paid off, and they got the business on track. I'm really sorry for making you wait. That's what Sean said when he gave me the ring just recently. Since then, things have moved smoothly, and we were able to make it to today. It's been a tough journey to this wedding, and the guests around us seem deeply moved, repeatedly saying, "I'm glad we made it through," while looking happy. Contrary to that, knowing everything already, my feelings have gone cold, and I was just firming up my resolve to show him hell. It's finally time for the bride and groom to enter, and the entrance music starts playing. Come on, Sean. Everyone's been waiting. But Sean, standing next to me, is pale as if he can't hear my voice at all. He's acting suspicious, looking around.
What's this? Stop it. Please stop.
What's wrong, Sean? I gently call out to Sean, who's covering his ears. Actually, I had the song that was supposed to play on our entrance changed at the last minute. And the BGM I chose was the conversation from the time Sean and his mistress were cheating in the park restroom. I had recorded the whole incident. Embarrassing conversations between Sean and his lover echoed through the venue. The guests seemed to notice, and I could tell from behind the doors that the venue was buzzing. It was a grossly vivid voice that was disgusting to hear again. An interaction that could make your skin crawl. And almost make you sick. Honestly, I didn't want to listen to such nauseating audio either. But as Sean desperately screamed, "Turn it off," I smiled and said, "No need to stop it." You were having a lot of fun, weren't you, while wrapping his arm in mine. Come on, Sean, let's hurry.
What are you planning, Sarah? Let go of my hand.
Why? We can't make our entrance as bride and groom unless we're arm in arm. I tightened my grip on Sean's arm to ensure he couldn't escape and stepped through the door. All eyes from the guests were on us. Look, everyone's watching.
Cut it out now.
Realizing what I had done, Sean roughly shook off my arm. Reluctantly letting go, I ignored the furious Sean and took the microphone to address the 39 guests. Ladies and gentlemen, thank you for gathering here today, but I have regrettable news. Sean and I will not be getting married. My declaration stirred the room again. Meanwhile, the conversation of Sean and his lover's affair continued to play clearly throughout the venue. It sounded even more dreadful through the speakers, making you want to cover your ears. The guests listened to me with expressions of surprise and confusion. To inform them of the truth, I continued calmly. I dreamed of a happy married life with Sean, but I discovered he betrayed me by having an affair. The room fell silent for a moment, and gasps of "the groom was cheating" were heard from the guests.
Hey, what are you starting now?
Sean tried to stop me by reaching for the microphone. I brushed his hand aside and continued talking, ignoring him. The proof of the affair is this audio you all are listening to right now. The male voice is unmistakably Sean, who was supposed to become my husband today. It's unfortunate that it has come to this, but knowing what I do now, I cannot marry him. I want to end our relationship here today. The guests quietly listened to my speech. I continued to explain how we reached this point. How I discovered the affair, what I felt approaching today. I spoke in detail. At that moment, my heart was filled with thoughts of revenge, but at the same time, I felt a quiet satisfaction that I was finally getting my revenge. My story started causing a stir among the guests, and the atmosphere in the venue turned indescribable.
You really embarrassed me good.
Enraged by the situation, Sean finally lunged at me.
Stop it.
But Sean's in-laws quickly intervened, catching Sean and stopping him. Dad, Mom, I haven't been cheating, I swear. This is some kind of mistake. Someone's trying to frame me. Restrained, Sean was now desperately pleading with his in-laws. It would be hard for anyone here to believe that this was all an act. Sean's seriousness at work was well known. He had been working tirelessly to turn around the company, which had been struggling, a fact well understood by his company's staff and the relatives. That's why the relatives who knew Sean well looked confused. His attitude towards work was respected by those around him, and his colleagues at the company also praised and trusted Sean for his efforts. To those around him, Sean didn't seem like someone who would cheat. My sister, Mary, who also worked with Sean at my father-in-law's company, often told me about how hard Sean worked. Sean himself was aware of his good reputation and was still making excuses, saying, "I wouldn't cheat." He must have thought he could fool everyone. "Sean, we know everything," his father said in a grave tone, and Sean's complexion changed. "What do you mean, you know? That you have been cheating?" Actually, it wasn't me who first noticed Sean's affair, it was the in-laws. They discovered it because of the pet camera they had set up at home for their cat. One day, by chance, that camera caught Sean cheating with his mistress. The shock for the in-laws must have been considerable. Modern pet cameras have very clear video and audio. You can imagine how the in-laws felt seeing their son's vivid affair. Sean and his mistress, not knowing about the pet camera, had unfortunately chosen to meet right in front of it. And it wasn't just once or twice. When the in-laws saw this, they immediately told me about Sean's cheating. When I first heard, I was too shocked to think straight. It was the in-laws who firmly supported me during my turmoil. Moreover, they told me, "If you decide to divorce our son, we'll help you with things like seeking alimony as much as possible," firmly taking my side. With the solid support of my in-laws, I decided to confront Sean's infidelity. First, I had to see it for myself. I decided to use their pet camera to monitor Sean. I set up the camera to send the video to my smartphone, and I checked it diligently. Finally, the day came when I witnessed Sean's affair through the camera footage. At that moment, I saw Sean's infidelity live from my own room. Hearing about it and seeing it firsthand are completely different in terms of the impact. From that moment, I couldn't stand Sean touching me, and even being in the same room with him filled me with disgust. While I still wanted to believe Sean based on just my in-laws' words, this experience was a rude awakening. Having witnessed the decisive moment, I lost all trust in Sean and had to acknowledge his betrayal. The shock of being betrayed was greater than I had imagined, and for a while, I couldn't even swallow my food. But knowing the truth solidified my resolve. I decided to face this issue in my own way until I could come to terms with it. Sean, realizing that everything was out in the open, was dumbfounded next to me. It seemed like he was so shocked that he couldn't even speak. If he thought he could continue living peacefully without getting caught after all he had done, he was incredibly naive. As I watched Sean standing there, looking foolish, I moved forward. Leaving Sean behind, I approached a woman among the attendees. An affair isn't something Sean could do alone. His accomplice, this woman, also needed a wake-up call. As I stood directly in front of her, the woman looked uncomfortable and quickly averted her eyes. But I addressed her anyway. Having an affair with your sister's fiancé, what were you thinking? My words caused another stir in the venue. The guests' voices of surprise filled the room. Sean's mistress was my own sister, Mary. My in-laws and I knew that Sean's affair partner was my sister Mary, but of course, the guests had no idea. The fact that my sister Mary had betrayed me and had an affair with Sean was an unbelievable and shocking truth, leaving the guests unable to hide their astonishment. From the crowd, exclamations like "No way, that can't be true," and "To steal your sister's fiancé, unbelievable," were heard. Amidst this, Mary glared at me, her lips trembling. Since we lost our parents when we were young, Mary was like a parent to me, especially when we were little. She was always my understanding confidant and a reliable presence. Of course, I loved her more than anyone and trusted her completely. That's why it was incredibly hard to believe and forgive that she would betray me and have an affair with Sean. I was betrayed by the two people I trusted most deeply and dearly, my sister and Sean. This betrayal changed my world entirely during what should have been a happy time before my marriage. The happiness I had envisioned was carelessly destroyed by these two. I should have been blessed by my sister today, celebrating my wedding with a joyful heart. I thought marrying Sean would bring me closer to being a real family with my wonderful in-laws. That has now become an unattainable dream.
Why would you have an affair with my fiancé, of all people? That's insane.
When I confronted her, Mary began to talk back without any sign of remorse.
I've been in love with Sean before you two were even planning to marry. I liked him first. You're the one who stole him from me.
Mary claimed that since she met Sean first at the company, she was his real love, and it was me who stole him. That doesn't justify. For you, I've worked hard all my life. I missed out on hanging out with friends and couldn't go to college because I worked part-time jobs, and I studied on my own to get my degree. And after all that, to have my sister steal the man I love, that's just cruel. You've repaid my kindness with betrayal. I took a breath before responding. First of all, I didn't even know you liked Sean, isn't that just holding a grudge? Shut up. What do you even know about Sean and me? Mary raised me, working hard. Because she graduated high school, couldn't go to the college she wanted. She probably felt she sacrificed her own dreams because of me. And now, she resented that I had taken the person she loved. Mary claimed that by stealing Sean, who is important to me, she was getting revenge by taking away the person and the happy marriage life that mattered to me. It's true I have caused Mary hardship. I feel more than gratitude towards her, I also feel sorry and guilty. But that's a different story from this one.
You think you can just be happy after being so ungrateful? You brought this on yourself. It's all your fault.
My in-laws stopped Mary as she tried to physically confront me in anger. We've heard about how Mary struggled to raise Sarah. She must have made sacrifices and really worked hard. But that's a separate issue. No matter the reason, no matter who it involves, infidelity is never justified. That's right, you two are the only family you each have in this world. Betraying the only family you have is unforgivable. Still, Mary wouldn't listen to our in-laws.
Stop speaking as if you understand everything. You don't know what I've been through. Why should Sarah be happy without any hardship? Just because I was born first and am the sister, I've had to sacrifice so much.
She snapped at the in-laws sharply. Instead of apologizing to me, she started to retort, Sean was only going to marry you to use you as a maid. Considering everything up to now, This is only natural. Sean doesn't love you, he's going to marry me eventually. Sean, Mary is saying this, but is it true? When I asked, Sean hesitated and looked away. No, that's not. Mary's indecisive response only made Mary more frustrated.
Sean always says it. His true love is me, and the sister is just a replacement for a maid.
Well, that's true, but... Sean, not clearly affirming or denying, finally made Mary explode.
Just tell her clearly.
As Mary grew increasingly irate, my in-laws and I were just exhausted inside. So I decided to reveal another truth about Sean. Sean has other lovers too. What are you talking about? That can't be true. Of course, you wouldn't know. Poor sister. In fact, Sean has other mistresses besides Mary. He was deceiving not just me but also Mary. However, the overly confident Mary was reluctant to believe these words. Huh? Who would believe such a lie? Are you trying to deceive me into giving up? That's sneaky. Seeing that my sister Mary showed no sign of trust, I decided to show her the evidence prepared by my in-laws, the footage from the pet camera. The video saved on my smartphone showed a man and a woman engaged in an affair, just like in Mary's case, right in front of the pet camera. Can you still deny it after seeing this? In front of Mary, I proved that Sean was cheating with another woman. Mary was in denial, but the evidence inevitably forced her to falter. This must be some mistake, right, Sean? Despite her disbelief, she questioned Sean, but he remained silent. Mary, it looks pathetic to keep denying it at this point. Why not just admit it? You were just another plaything for him, I said calmly while looking at Sean. However, Mary, desperate to defend her position, continued to resist.
That can't be. I am special to Sean. I'm different from you.
Mary, you've said it yourself before. What goes around comes around. This is the consequence of deceiving others. It's what you call karma. I spoke calmly. Yet Mary was furious and exploded in anger. Finally, she started shouting, "Shut up! Be quiet," and began to lash out. The venue became chaotic, and as Mary was restrained by the wedding staff, and the onlookers' attention focused on her, she was hurriedly escorted out of the venue. The guests witnessed the scene and could not hide their surprise and intrigue, causing a stir in the venue. Amid this strange atmosphere, I took the microphone again and apologized to the guests. I'm sorry that this has happened when you all came to celebrate our marriage. I deeply regret having to expose a family disgrace and cause such disruption at this event. It might seem in poor taste to choose a wedding as the place to reveal my fiancé's affair and that his other woman was my own sister. I truly felt sorry for the guests who came to bless our marriage. But the truth is, I was too hurt and saddened not to expose this disgrace on such an occasion. I understand that the betrayal by Sean and my sister Mary cannot be undone, even with actions like these. I truly believe that such matters should be resolved through discussion without involving everyone. However, I just couldn't forgive Sean and my sister. I want them to never forget this and live with regret. And I want all of you here as witnesses to this. The guests at the venue nodded quietly, appearing to sympathize with me. In contrast, Sean received cold stares from everyone and collapsed on the spot. I'm sorry. Please forgive me. Sean could only prostrate himself, repeating apologies to no one in particular. But his apologies reached no one, everyone just looked on coldly. Later, Sean was fired from his company. However, he wasn't fired for the affair, but because his misconduct was discovered. Sean had been working hard to turn around the struggling company, but that was just the facade. In reality, he was involved in corrupt dealings that benefited the company. Misconduct is bound to be discovered sooner or later. I never intended to commit misconduct. I did it solely for the company, to turn it around.
Fool! Who asked you to go that far? Misconduct is misconduct, it's not forgivable, and even if you turn things around with such methods, the trust is completely lost.
Scolded by my father-in-law, Sean continued with his pathetic excuses. I knew it wasn't right. I was always wondering when to come clean. But as my reputation continued to rise without the misconduct coming to light, I found myself unable to turn back. Thus, Sean's anxiety grew, and he began to resort to affairs to escape his worries. As a result, you've lost the trust of not only me but also your father-in-law, mother-in-law, colleagues, and everyone around you. This incident resulted in Sean losing the trust of his in-laws and the people around him, and he seemed to be driven into a corner mentally. Finally, I found the words to apologize to my in-laws. Even after that, I kept receiving messages from the surrounding people expressing their regret. And so, having had a change of heart, the message was about wanting to start over. Of course, I blocked their contact and didn't bother replying. I have no intention of ever meeting them again. It seems Sean apologized again to his in-laws and the people around him, but not a single person was willing to forgive him. Once you've lost that trust, it's hard to regain. On the other hand, my sister also got caught cheating and found it difficult to stay at her job, so she decided to quit. The shock of being deceived by Sean had taken a toll on her appearance and mental state. Especially compared to how fashionable she used to be, she now looks like a completely different person in her worn-out dress, with no makeup. Despite all this, my sister eventually came to me seeking help, but naturally, I turned her away. Can you lend me some money? It's not like you can't work, right? You should find a job soon.
I'm the one who raised you all this time. It's too cruel of you to push me away when I'm in trouble. You heartless person.
I truly appreciate everything you've done for me. It's precisely because of that gratitude that I can't forgive what you've done. Let's live separate lives from now on. I've made up my mind to completely sever ties with my sister. I also wanted to repay my sister for raising me by helping her from now on. I wanted us to live as sisters, not as surrogate parents, and do things together that we couldn't before. But even that turned out to be an unattainable dream. I might never see my sister again. The betrayal by Sean and my sister has become an unforgettable event in my life. The shock was immense, and the wounds are far from healing. Even if I've exacted revenge in this manner, it doesn't erase the pain. Even if Sean and my sister suffer, it's no longer my concern. All that remains is the fact of being betrayed, weighing heavily on me, unable to escape. Being betrayed by someone you trusted was more damaging than I expected. But once again, it was my in-laws who came to my rescue. They keep telling me, "We consider you our real daughter and we want you to rely on us anytime." Just hearing those words encouraged me. My in-laws, who have always been on my side and will continue to support me, are like real parents to me, especially since I don't have my own. From now on, I'll live to repay them. With that vow in my heart, I've decided to take a new step forward.
Long time no see. It seems like you've become quite famous and are making good money, aren't you? Hey, don't you think it's time to repay the debt of me giving birth to you?
That's how my sister-in-law, who had vanished after dumping her blind niece on me and my husband, showed up upon seeing her niece's success.
I only had a child because my ex-husband really wanted one, but he was the one who quickly abandoned us. Now, repay the favor of me feeding and keeping you alive back then.
What an outrageous thing to say. I wanted to send my sister-in-law away immediately, but my niece thought her aunt's argument made sense and decided to live with her. I was worried and anxious, but wished for nothing but my niece's happiness as I sent her off. Yet 4 days later, my sister-in-law returned with a bruised face, furious.
How can you live with such a rough kid?
My niece, rough? What did she mean? My head was filled with questions after hearing my sister-in-law's side. But the worst of her days were just beginning. After graduating from college, I was transferred out of state due to a job relocation, leaving my hometown behind. Years later, I had a reunion with my college friends and reconnected with my now husband, a senior I had once admired. It felt like a return to my student days when we exchanged contact details. It turned out my husband was working at a different branch of the same company, and we grew closer, eventually marrying and starting a new chapter as a married couple. We both worked for a while, but when my husband was assigned a long-distance transfer, I decided to follow him and resigned from my job. With further transfers, I naturally became a homemaker. After several relocations, my husband was promoted, freeing us from constant moves. We were called to the headquarters and now live in a suburb near a city. Due to frequent transfers, we chose not to have children. Originally planning to dedicate my life to my career, marriage and homemaking were unplanned aspects of my life. So when my husband brought up having children, it wasn't much of a shock. Then one day, my sister-in-law appeared with my niece in tow. She had married and given birth to my niece years earlier. However, due to personality clashes, she was abandoned by her husband and divorced. At that time, we were living at the northernmost tip and couldn't support her, making my husband feel guilty and occasionally provide her with financial help. It wasn't that my husband was eager to help, rather it was my sister-in-law who kept asking him for money. At first, he generously helped thinking of my niece, but my sister-in-law never tried to work. Her constant requests for money were clearly relying on my husband's earnings, and he gradually lost patience, deciding to cut ties. Both my husband and my sister-in-law's parents had passed away, leaving no relatives to rely on. Although my husband initially responded to her needs, he grew increasingly frustrated as her attitude towards life didn't change. However, he always cared deeply for my niece. When I last saw my sister-in-law, she looked more flamboyant, while my niece had drastically changed. Still growing, she was emaciated, with a large gauze covering her entire eye and visible scars on her arms. She constantly seemed in pain and concerned about her eye. Despite seeing her daughter in such a state, my sister-in-law showed no concern, sporting a self-deprecating grin.
This kid, despite being a girl, is so wild. She boldly fell face first by herself. Seems like she got a twig stuck in her eye. She's in pain. Hilarious, right?
I couldn't understand how she could laugh at such a situation. When I asked if they had gone to the hospital, she laughed it off as an exaggeration and forcefully changed the subject.
Look after her for a while. I've finally moved nearby, so I'm hoping you guys can help out a bit,
she said, but it's tough to just take her on the spot, and I told her to wait until I could check with my husband. However, my sister-in-law didn't listen at all and forcefully left her with us before leaving. I felt indignant at my sister-in-law's selfish behavior, but I was more concerned about my niece's injuries. I thought it best to get her seen at a hospital as soon as possible, so I gave up chasing after my sister-in-law. While heading to the hospital in a taxi, I briefly explained the situation to my husband. At the hospital, the doctor said her cuts and bruises would heal naturally, but her eye was another story. Too much time had passed since the injury, and she would likely lose most of her sight, possibly all of it, due to a condition called sympathetic ophthalmia. There was a high risk she might lose sight in the other eye as well. It was heartbreaking to think such a young child would have to bear the burden of blindness. At the hospital, I hugged my trembling niece, who looked so anxious among strangers. When my husband came home that day, I told him everything. Even though we tried to contact my sister-in-law, she wouldn't answer her phone, and then it went dead. We couldn't afford to wait for her approval for my niece's treatment, so my husband and I decided to proceed on our own. 3 days after losing contact, we filed a missing person report with the police. However, they said they couldn't search just for my sister-in-law without any signs of foul play. Occasionally, when unidentified bodies were found, we were contacted if they were women around my sister-in-law's age, but none were her. By the time 2 years had passed since my sister-in-law disappeared, my husband and I were treating and raising my niece as our own daughter. As a child through high school, I had taken piano lessons seriously. Initially, it was just a hobby, but when I had to accompany my school choir, I felt I had to give it my all, so I wouldn't let my classmates down, which led me to take piano more seriously. However, I wasn't skilled enough to become a professional performer. At best, I'd be a beginner's piano teacher. I continued playing as a hobby in college, and my niece became interested in the sound of my piano and started playing. She wasn't perfect pitch, but she could remember and play songs with proper expression after hearing them a few times. When I began teaching her piano, her talent quickly blossomed. She progressed rapidly, interpreting pieces in her way and even composing her music. She wanted more people to hear her play, so I suggested we post videos online. At the time, videos of street performances were popular, so we thought it might get some views if we followed that trend. Our plan was a hit, and she gained attention as a blind pianist. Around that time, as we were concerned about my niece's future, we were relieved to think she could make a living from her talent. Although my husband and I had planned to save enough money so she wouldn't struggle financially when alone, that money wasn't unlimited. We were just hoping to create an environment where she could work and not struggle to live, even if it was minimal. If she could make a living playing the piano she loved, nothing could be better. We started receiving inquiries from TV stations for appearances and permissions for secondary use of her videos. When one TV station got permission to use a video, it quickly became known nationwide. Just as negotiations for appearances from other networks began and record companies started proposing CD releases, my sister-in-law, who had been missing, suddenly reappeared. She had been sitting in front of our house, seemingly waiting for us to come out. While my husband and I were in shock, my sister-in-law hugged my niece, apologizing for not being able to come get her due to circumstances, while tears welled up in her eyes. She said she never forgot about her niece and was surprised but relieved to see her growing up on TV, saying things a mother would say. When my husband asked her where she had been and what she had been doing, she retorted that there was no need to tell him. Ignoring my husband, she reached out to my niece.
So, Sophia, I'm in a bit of a bind, especially financially, so, could you support me? I raised you after your father and I split up, so think of it as returning the favor.
My husband, infuriated that it all came down to money, drove my sister-in-law away. However, undeterred, my sister-in-law kept coming back to see my niece. When my husband was around, he could always send her away, but when it was just my niece and me, she was persistent and wouldn't leave, forcing us to listen to her tales of hardship. She intended to work and leave my niece with us, but her company went bankrupt, and she hadn't been paid for days, going without food or drink. She claimed at times she was forced to live on the streets, had saved up money to come get my niece but was swindled out of it all. Now, she's being targeted by dangerous debt collectors. She pleaded for us to lend her money just for this month's payment as her life was in danger. My husband and I rejected her claims as she brought it upon herself, but as my niece listened to her story, she seemed to grow sympathetic and declared she would go with her aunt. Furthermore, she even offered to cover this month's debt for her. I felt incredibly sad, realizing that a real mother's bond is hard to compete with. No matter how much we worried and loved her, we couldn't match her neglectful biological mother. Yet, it seemed my niece had always dreamed of living with her mother. With that in mind, I couldn't stop her decision. I told my niece she could always rely on us if things got tough. This house is still her home, and she can come back whenever she wants. She thanked me and left with her aunt. I hoped her aunt would change her ways and make up for the lost time by making my niece happy. However, seeing the triumphant smile on my sister-in-law's face only increased my worries. But 4 days later, my sister-in-law returned with my niece, her face bruised.
How can you live with such a barbaric kid?
She yelled the moment she saw me. What did she mean my niece was barbaric? It was hard to imagine my blind niece doing something to her. But I had some suspicions.
You didn't, by any chance, grab her from behind without saying anything, did you?
Even for someone who can see, it's frightening to be grabbed suddenly from behind. For my niece, who can't see, not being able to tell who it is would probably make her resist desperately.
So what if I did? I'm her mother. And this barbarian pushed me away.
There it was, she had done it. It seems that wasn't all. My sister-in-law had tapped my niece on the shoulder and grabbed her arm without speaking first. My niece could sense people around her to some extent, even though she can't see. But always having to be alert, she's vulnerable in places she feels safe, like at home. Touching her carelessly in such states was bound to startle her into resisting. I was concerned for my niece, who must have been frightened.
Why do you feel sorry for that barbarian? It's ridiculous. You should be concerned about me.
My sister-in-law had done that on the first day, apparently hitting her body against the wall. Undeterred, she did the same the next day, falling and bruising her face. The following day she did it again, hitting the corner of a table and adding to her bruises and injuries.
I taught you what to be careful of when living with my blind niece. Why didn't you heed that? Stop nagging. I'm the only one in the house, why should I have to watch over my own child?
My sister-in-law then started ranting nonsensically about how my niece was violent towards her because she resented her. My husband, outraged that this was going nowhere, said people like her are not suited to live with someone who is visually impaired and kicked her out of the house. I'm sorry. I must have made things harder for you, I said, feeling unsure how to comfort my niece as her hopes of living with her biological mother were dashed, and I just kept apologizing. However, my niece didn't seem too hurt and smiled, saying,
I never intended to stay with her long anyway. I just wanted her to experience firsthand how hard it is to live with someone who's visually impaired.
My niece thought that if her aunt, who dislikes complications, experienced the difficulties, she'd give up quickly. That she lasted 4 days was a miracle, probably because she was so desperate for money. In the end, my sister-in-law weighed money against freedom and chose freedom. I don't think that persistent person will bother us anymore. The only parents I have are you and Dad, my niece said, then hugged my husband and me. Blood ties don't matter. We were already a family. A few days later, my niece had to travel to a regional TV station for a live performance. My husband had an important work commitment, so I went with her alone. She wasn't yet signed with any agency, so I had to act like her manager. While metropolitan TV stations might send someone to pick us up, regional ones didn't provide such thorough support. However, it was a station we had visited before, so I figured it would be manageable. The shoot wasn't in a studio, but inside a historic building where we were allowed to place a piano and broadcast her playing live. Just as we thought we were connected for the broadcast, an unexpected person barged in. I am the biological mother of the blind pianist. My daughter was taken away by my own brother and his wife. As soon as she realized my niece was making money, my sister-in-law claimed during her absence we had forcibly taken her. Initially, the TV station wanted to cut her off, but then decided her emotional appeal might make for compelling viewing and broadcast her tearful plea. We were portrayed in a negative light. But I couldn't stand her using my niece as a pawn.
Stop making reckless accusations,
I said as I tried to pull her away from the camera. However, she resisted. This evil woman has stolen my beloved daughter. Police, are you watching? Arrest her. Some of the TV staff, despite their orders, started questioning whether it was right to air this. What are security doing? Voices were raised about how an unrelated person was allowed inside. Then, my niece slowly stood up, taking control of the situation, and raised her voice. What this woman is saying is a lie. I will tell you the truth. Where is the camera that's filming me? When the cameraman indicated where he was, my niece turned towards the sound and confessed our complex relationship. When I was a child, I suffered a severe injury to my face. The most significant damage was to my eye. The reason I am blind is that the woman claiming to be my biological mother did not take me to the hospital. She also talked about how my sister-in-law had left her at our house, prioritizing her freedom, and then disappeared, leading us to live as a family. She learned piano from me, and she credited that for her success today. Unlike my sister-in-law, who became emotional, my niece spoke calmly and clearly, making it obvious whose claims were truthful. After she started appearing on TV, the long-lost sister-in-law showed up out of the blue, clearly just for money. My niece tried living with her, but her aunt was completely incapable of dealing with a visually impaired person and acted selfishly. At the same time, my husband, watching the broadcast from his workplace, learned that a man claiming to be my niece's uncle was explaining the same story to the TV station's headquarters by phone, further disproving my sister-in-law's claims. The on-site manager had my sister-in-law detained by security, and then the staff called the police, resulting in an interrogation. Although the live broadcast was interrupted, my niece performed bravely and flawlessly. I heard that the TV station's phone lines were inundated afterward. From complaints about my sister-in-law to messages of support for my niece, the feedback varied. The incident also spread on social media, resulting in some of the highest ratings and replay counts the station had ever seen. We planned to go home right after the broadcast, but due to the incident with my sister-in-law's intrusion, the police wanted to speak with us, so we stayed overnight at a hotel. Given the circumstances, my husband entrusted his work to a reliable colleague and came to join us. That evening, the police came to our hotel to hear my sister-in-law's side. She reportedly told them she had accumulated significant debt by financially supporting a man, planning to use public sympathy to extract alimony from us. My sister-in-law had targeted the moment I was away from my husband, following my niece and me. Today, while my niece and I were at the regional TV station and my husband was at work. Our separate activities, especially since it was an on-location shoot, made it easy for her to enter, posing as staff without suspicion. She told us that because many people come and go, and she claimed to be staff, no one suspected her and she could easily get inside. The TV station later apologized to us. The director who broadcasted her claims live ended up being demoted. The backlash was so significant that they had to take such action, as ignoring the volume of complaints wasn't an option. Of course, the encouragement for my niece was overwhelming, but the complaints were too loud to ignore. My husband listened silently as the police spoke and as the TV station apologized. Once they left and it was just our family, he reflected on my sister-in-law's past. My sister has always loved the limelight and depended too much on men. Dependency would be one thing, but her recklessness and inability to be faithful often led her into conflicts with men. When she was in high school, besides her boyfriend, she apparently tasted others out of curiosity, which once led to an assault incident. We thought she had settled down after marrying my niece's father, but it turned out she hadn't changed. My husband speculated that it wasn't really irreconcilable differences, as claimed, but rather her infidelity that drove my niece's father away. Disgusted beyond words, he decisively cut ties with her. The incident with my sister-in-law crashing the broadcast was covered first by local news and then by national television. On social media, self-proclaimed justice warriors researched and spread her history. Whether that was right or wrong, for our family, it meant she couldn't easily walk around outside anymore, for which we were grateful. It seemed unlikely she would stalk my niece anytime soon. She had apparently borrowed money from many people. And since the broadcast revealed her location, she found herself in quite a predicament. Some who were looking for her spotted her being chased by suspicious individuals during a live stream by a content creator looking for views. This became a hot topic, which I also saw. Some posts on social media even offered a bounty for capturing my sister-in-law, presenting it as a high-paying gig, showing how desperate the situation had become. While there was no immediate danger to us or my niece, we couldn't rule out debt collectors using my niece to get to her, so we prioritized her safety and decided to move. This also led to my niece signing with a talent agency, which arranged for a manager, assistants, and security to accompany her. Additionally, we hired private security to guard her even when she wasn't working. Although having someone always around might seem uncomfortable, my niece surprisingly found it reassuring. She soon has a solo performance at one of the nation's top music halls. Our wish is for her to always be happy, but for now, we are focused on praying for the success of her upcoming concert. More. Oh no, more. Animal-like moans emanated from the living room. The one writhing under someone's weight was my best friend. A very close friend since junior high school. This dear friend was shaking her bare white legs up and down. The ragged breathing of the man, my husband, spoke volumes about the intensity of their actions. I was infuriated. That my husband and she would do this in our house. I stepped forward, phone screen still aimed at the two of them. My friend noticed and let out a short scream. My fully naked husband sat up in shock. It was time to end our completely rotten relationship. I yelled loudly, "Don't move. My name is Anna, I'm 30 years old. I work at a trading company. I am part of the business development department. I handle tough work every day. Unfortunately, as a workaholic, I hadn't had any romantic involvement until I was 28. It was Sean, a representative from a client company, who approached me. He was a very kind and caring man, husband to my friend Maria. Hey, I have a friend from my college days who's really interesting. If it's okay with you, Anna, maybe I can introduce you next time? Actually, he seems interested in you too. That's how I met Ken. I remember thinking he seemed like a nice, bright guy with a fresh appearance. Ken worked at an advertising agency, clearly a capable and promising man. I'm Ken. Nice to meet you. Nice to meet you, I'm Anna.
Sean showed me your photo, but you're much prettier in person.
Thank you, Ken. Initially, our relationship was going very smoothly. I had fallen head over heels for my first ever boyfriend. Maria, my best friend since junior high school and Sean's wife, seemed surprised by the change in me.
It's amazing how love can change someone as serious as Anna used to be.
I'm surprised. Ken and I are gonna go check out some wedding venues soon.
Wow! Isn't this the most fun time? Make sure you enjoy it.
I didn't need Maria to tell me that. I thoroughly enjoyed choosing the wedding venue and picking out dresses. I managed to achieve my goal of getting married by the age of 30. That splendid wedding is still a fond memory, as vivid as if it were a dream. Little did I know, behind those happy days, my husband was up to no good. At that time, I had no way of knowing, nor could I have imagined it. It was about a year after we got married. Suddenly, Ken announced he was quitting his job. Needless to say, I was bewildered. He was giving up a stable job, and what was he planning to do next? Did you get an offer from somewhere? You must have something lined up, right? No? I'm starting a business with some friends. It's a venture company for app development.
What? That's news to me.
Well, of course it is. I'm telling you for the first time. And I have a favor to ask. Ken then asked me for financial support. He wanted to borrow about $40,000 from my savings. Apparently, the funds he and his friends had were not enough. If he needed money to start a business, there were plenty of ways to get it. He could apply for loans. I was going to refuse, saying just that, but then Ken asked me again.
Please, Anna. I'm trying to raise funds in other ways too, but it's tough getting enough. That's why I'm asking you, knowing it's a lot to ask.
But we need to save too. We might have kids someday, and we need to prepare for retirement starting now.
Of course I understand. I'll pay it back as soon as the business takes off. So please.
After he repeatedly bowed his head, I finally gave in. I lent my husband $40,000. A significant chunk of our savings was gone. But supporting his venture seemed like a duty as his partner. At the time, I even thought it was a noble thing to do. Still, why did he suddenly decide to start a business? Who came up with the idea? Who's in charge of the business? What exactly will they do in app development? When will the organization be structured, and what kind of app will they develop? I asked my husband to tell me as many specifics as possible. I really should have checked before lending the money, but can you tell me the details anyway? You have a business plan, right? Even tax filing documents would do. No, I don't have those documents. One of my partners manages all that. Then talk to that person. I am an investor, after all, right? I think I have the right to know the details about Ken and his partner's business, don't I? Yeah, you're right. I'll get the documents next time. However, the next time Ken mentioned never seemed to come. No matter how long I waited, I couldn't get the documents. It was always just a matter of waiting a little longer. After being put off over and over, I pressed him and Ken snapped.
I have my own circumstances. You can't just expect me to bring out confidential information so easily. Just trust me and wait for the results. Got it?
I'm sorry. I didn't mean to make you angry. Being yelled at by Ken, who is older, honestly scared me. In the end, I was never able to see the documents. Raising his voice could intimidate me. He knew it. After that, Ken gradually began to take a more arrogant attitude towards me. At home, he would call me hey and snap at me if something didn't please him. His spending became more extravagant. There were times he would demand more money, saying it was for business discussions with his partners.
Just talking about business, why do you need to spend money? Some discussions can't happen unless we're drinking. Or do you think it's okay for me, the only one in the group, to be broke? You want your husband to be embarrassed in public? Come on, no need to get so angry. Our business is definitely gonna produce great results. When it does, I'll pay you back 3 or 4 times the amount. So come on, hurry up and give it. I'm gonna be late for the meetup.
That's what Ken rushed me with. Reluctantly, I lent him the money. I kept a record of how much and when I lent him money. That was about the only resistance I could muster at the time. Shadows were beginning to fall over what was supposed to be a smooth marriage. During the daytime on a weekend, I called Maria to a cafe to update her on the situation. When I told her that Ken had quit his job to start a business, Maria was astounded.
Ken is quite ambitious, isn't he? I'm seeing him in a new light.
Think of it as someone else's problem. The tough part is on me. I'm the one supporting the household alone.
Well, don't get down about it, just keep supporting him. A husband can only take on new challenges because his wife is solidly keeping the home, right? And it's gonna be a successful business, isn't it?
He says it's sure to succeed, but I really wonder. The conversation shifted to Maria's complaints. She was dissatisfied with Sean. Compared to Ken, Sean seemed uninteresting. He's too stiff, just not fun. He should take on new challenges. That's why Ken, as a man, is much better.
Really?
I think Sean, who lives a stable life, is more admirable.
Not at all.
That's a guy who can't make it anywhere.
Whenever I start something new, Sean is the first one to get in the way. It really gets on my nerves.
Both of Maria's parents were school teachers. She was a top student who grew up in a very strict household. But once she left her parents' home, it seemed the backlash came out. Now, she was as wayward and unrestrained as you couldn't imagine from her student days. Just recently, Maria quit her job at an architectural office and started going to beauty school. She had been interested in the beauty industry for a while and was now getting a certification. Maybe she defended Ken because he, like her, was a challenger. Due to beauty school, Maria's clothes became flashier every time we met. Even though she shouldn't have any income right now. Poor Sean. I couldn't help but think about it. One day, after work, someone was waiting for me. It was Sean. He looked serious. He said he needed just 30 minutes of my time, so I joined him in a cafe. I need to keep this a secret, but Sean sighed deeply.
You know Maria started going to beauty school, right?
Yeah, I heard. Didn't she say something about graduating soon? It turns out she's hardly been attending at all.
What? Then what has she been doing all this time?
Sean sighed again. Apparently, Maria has been hanging out instead of going to school. He was sure because he had hired a private investigator to look into it. Using a private investigator. Sean must be really troubled. I didn't want to think about what Maria might be doing instead of going to school, but I just had to know, so I hired a detective. And then Sean placed a photo face down in front of me. He told me to look at it. I gently picked up the photo and turned it over, freezing in shock at what I saw. The image was overwhelmingly shocking. It was taken by a private investigator. Sean's words seemed distant. What should I do next? I had no idea. I think the busy season and the stress had piled up. One day, I fell ill, which was rare for me. I felt feverish and had a headache. I just couldn't focus on work. And whatever I did, that incident kept crossing my mind. What should I do now? I sighed for what felt like the umpteenth time. Seeing my state, my boss kindly suggested I leave early. It's great to have such a wonderful boss. Grateful for the offer, I decided to head home. The source of my current distress was none other than my husband, Ken. As a married couple, we need to talk things through. That's what the serious part of me believes. Yet, there's another part of me that's so angry it feels trivial. I want to confront him, pin him down, and forcefully uncover the truth while shouting at him. Both feelings are genuine. Choosing the latter might very well end our marriage. Should I handle things calmly, or? Lost in thought, I trudged back to my condo. As I touched the front door, a faint unease made me freeze. I could hear muffled voices. Not the kind of sounds one should hear in the middle of the day. Someone was with someone else. I slowly turned the key and quietly opened the door. Just as I thought. The voices were coming from my and Ken's room. Apparently, the living room. I moved cautiously, careful not to make a sound on the floor. The living room door was wide open.
More. Oh no, more.
It was Maria, sprawled out and enjoying herself. Her bare white legs kicking up and down like an animal. Ken was the other person. Fervently moving his hips while breathing heavily. Watching them, I felt a surge of rage. After typing a quick message, I pointed my phone's screen at them. Maria noticed and let out a short scream. Ken sat up in shock.
Don't move. Anna. Why? I'm on a video call. Maria, got anything to say? What? Oh. Sean.
Maria turned pale. Understandably so. After all, my husband's face was on my phone's screen. I had just texted him and started the video call abruptly. The infidelity caught live had clearly shaken Sean.
Maria, weren't you supposed to be at school today at this time? No, it's not like that. What do you mean it's not like that? Ken, don't you have anything to say? Sorry. What should I say?
Both were at a loss for words. It's no surprise given the situation they were caught in. I ordered them to get dressed first. Being naked was just too unsightly. Disliking the stale air in the room, I opened all the doors and windows. Ken and Maria were now sitting down in front of me. Standing, I looked down at them with Sean on the phone.
I came home early because I had a headache, but Ken, why are you at home during the day? What happened to starting that app development business? Did it fall through? No, it's not that. I just took the day off.
Hey, Ken.
Can you return the $40,000 I lent you by tomorrow? I can't trust you anymore. I can't leave my money with you. You get what I'm saying, right? Tomorrow. That's impossible, all of a sudden.
Despite his business supposedly not even starting, Ken couldn't provide a reason why he couldn't repay. He mumbled a string of unclear excuses, a pathetic sight. Next, I turned my questioning gaze to Maria, who sat beside Ken, looking downhearted. Maria, what about you? Sean just asked you, right? What happened with school? Did you leave early like I did? If so, what's your reason?
I might check with the school depending on your answer. Wait. I just didn't feel like going today. Mood? You decide whether or not to go to school based on your mood. Even though I'm paying your tuition? You think that kind of behavior is acceptable.
Ken and Maria kept making excuses, thinking I knew nothing about it. I was so fed up. I felt foolish for ever considering forgiving them. I no longer wanted to hear any lies or evasions. I decided to settle everything right there and then. A few minutes later, Sean arrived at our place. Maria tried to approach him, apologizing. But Sean stopped her with a gesture and ordered her to sit down.
Don't come any closer. Ken, Maria, I have a lot to say to you both.
Sean's voice was icy, conveying just how angry he was. It's often said that the quietest people are the scariest when they get angry. Ken and Maria seemed to think so too, as tension filled the air between them.
Ken, you borrowed money from Anna too, not just me? What? Ken, you borrowed from Sean too? How many people have you conned? What's the total amount? Can you even pay it back? I'll pay it back. Of course, I will. It's just that I don't see how yet.
The business was halfway done. There were no profits yet, so he couldn't repay. He claimed he would start paying back little by little soon. Ken said that, but Sean shook his head.
No, I want it back by tomorrow. If not, show me the business plan. No, I can't do that. There are confidentiality obligations. Again with that? You said the same when borrowing the money. Couldn't explain the details, but assured me it would definitely be profitable. I trusted you and lent you the money. Sorry. I just can't pay it right now.
Sean sighed deeply. He glared at Maria, who straightened her back under his gaze. Sean stared at his unfaithful wife for a moment.
Maria, you owe me the tuition. Pay back everything. What? But that was an investment for me, Sean said. It was meant to be an investment. But what about you? Saying you're not in the mood to go to school and sleep with another man during the day, it's just the worst. I'm sorry. I won't do it again.
Maria looked down, seemingly repentant. However, Sean did not ease his pursuit. It seemed he was ready to let out everything he had been holding back.
Even if you apologize, I'm not planning to forgive you. Maria, I'll be taking back all the money you wasted with the card. You're going to repay everything you spent. Got it? What? Impossible. I'm not even working. Then quit school right now and get a job. I'm not spending another cent on you. You've betrayed me. You did something absolutely unforgivable.
No matter how much Maria apologized, it was useless. Sean's anger only grew. The affair between his wife and his friend had clearly impacted him deeply. Then, tears began to well up in Maria's eyes as she was pushed away. She began to cry like a child, her mouth turned down.
What? It's all your fault for not paying any attention to me, isn't it? That's why I ended up doing this. Don't you get that? Reflect on it. So you're saying it's my fault? Because I'm always working and don't pay attention to you, is infidelity excused? You think you've done nothing wrong? Give me a break. I was wrong too, but aren't there parts where you weren't great either? Apologize. Then we can talk. The nerve. Fine. It's over. We're getting a divorce. Here, sign this.
How prepared he was. Sean had brought the divorce papers. Pushed by him, Maria, looking angry, signed them. She seemed desperate and began to lash out.
What? You're such a prude with no prospects. I'd refuse you anyway. You're just an employee with no hope of promotion. Ken is far more ambitious and impressive than you.
That's true.
I'm not the type to compete for promotions with others. I won't deny it. At this rate, I'll always just be an employee. But you know, I'm about to become a CEO soon. What? What do you mean? CEO?
Maria and Ken were both stunned. Anyone would be suddenly hit with such news. But I had been informed by Sean beforehand. It turned out he was going to take over a company from his maternal aunt.
My uncle asked me to take over the company. What? Really? Is that true? Why would I lie about it here? The business overlaps with my current work, so I'm really motivated now.
I'll be a business owner. A company with an annual revenue of $40 million. Maria turned pale upon hearing the amount. It seemed she had just realized her mistake. She quickly moved to cling to Sean. It's ugly the way she grinded at his feet. It was really disgraceful.
Wait. Let's pretend the divorce talk never happened. It's unfair to say that now.
What's unfair? You're not interested in a plain guy with no prospects, right? Why don't you enjoy your time with Ken, the ambitious one? Wasn't that what you wanted?
No, that's a lie. I was wrong. Please, don't leave me. I'll do anything.
Perhaps it was the power of the $40 million word. Maria, throwing away her shame and public opinion, was desperately clinging to Sean. Sean must have anticipated this, which is why he had her sign the divorce papers beforehand. Then it was my turn. I took out the divorce papers I had prepared from my bag and showed them to Ken. It's your turn now. Sign this. Right now.
Anna, are you hiding something like Sean?
Not at all. What does it matter if I was hiding something? That's irrelevant. I can't trust you anymore, so I want a divorce. That's all there is to it.
Let me try again, please. I promise I'll never cheat again.
Absolutely not. A redo was out of the question. Did he think I knew nothing? I had known about their relationship for months, and yet I had been struggling with it all this time. Just so you know, both Sean and I have known about your affair for months now.
What? Is that true? Sean, really? And yet you acted normally.
Yes, it's been tough, but it's not just my problem. Anna and I were discussing what to do about it. Then this happened. We couldn't overlook it anymore, so Sean and I decided to resolve things. We would divorce and rid ourselves of the trouble. Today, in this place, 2 marriages would come to an end. Ken and Maria both protested, but their resistance was futile. Now that it's come to this, I'll tell you everything. Ken, we also know that your so-called business plan was a complete lie. There was never a plan to start an app development company, was there? You've been spending the money you swindled on online casinos, haven't you? We've looked into it.
What? That is... What? What do you mean? Weren't you going to become a CEO?
It seemed Maria too had been deceived by Ken. There was no chance of getting any money back from Ken's venture. Because the business plan itself was a lie. When I found out, I was so disappointed. I thought I was foolish to believe, and it depressed me so much that it interfered with my work. Sean probably felt the same. He looked at Ken with a very cold gaze.
Liar. Traitor. Good for nothing. I believed you when you said you'd become wealthy. You fool. What do you think I slept with you for? Like I care. It's your own fault for believing so easily.
Ken, are you seriously saying that? That it's our fault for believing? It's hopeless. There's no saving this. No point in being defiant now. Sean was right. Being defiant now would only worsen my position. It seemed even Ken had realized that much. He straightened his posture and knelt down.
I'm truly sorry for lying all this time. From now on, I'll change my ways and work honestly. I'll definitely repay the money I borrowed. Please, just don't divorce me. Me too. I'll change my ways too. Please, don't throw me away.
The naivety of these two was astonishing. Thinking apologies would make everything okay. Ken and Maria didn't understand the extent of our anger. Sean and I looked at each other and sighed. We were utterly dismayed. There's no chance of repairing this relationship. And just so you know, there are hidden cameras in this room. Everything you two have been doing is recorded.
What? When did you install that?
Just recently. I wanted to keep a close watch on what Ken was doing and what was happening in this apartment while I was away during the day. Anna, please give me the video later. I need to secure the evidence. Of course. If it ever came to a legal battle, having evidence would make winning much easier. No matter how much Ken and Maria squirmed, they were utterly powerless against the video evidence. But the two already seemed resigned. They appeared to have lost the will to resist. I urged Ken to sign the divorce papers again.
Just give up and sign the divorce papers. If you keep arguing, I'll send the video we took today to your father and mother. No! Please, not that! That would be terrible.
Yes, it would be terrible.
Your father and mother would be shocked to learn how you betrayed me like this.
Ken was an only child, born late in his parents' lives. His parents were both in their mid-70s and living in a care facility. Imagine how they would react if they saw their son's infidelity. It could cause a stroke from the shock or worse if they fell and hit their heads. It was a bitter way to leverage, but the effect on Ken was immediate. He signed the divorce papers as I commanded.
Well, I'll be leaving. I have things I want to do back home. Wait, I'll help. I'll do anything. I can be a housekeeper or whatever you need. Just please keep me by your side.
No, that's not necessary.
What I'm about to do is throw out all your belongings from the house.
Take what you need.
Anything left will be picked up by a service and disposed of. No! Wait! Please wait, Sean! Please, I'm begging you!
Sean and Maria left. What I was about to do wasn't different from Sean's actions. It's time to clear out the past. I need to get rid of everything unnecessary from this apartment.
I'm going to the lawyer's office to file the divorce papers. You pack your things and move out. Let me know where you end up. I'll send the rest of your stuff COD. Anna, is it really over? Can't we start over?
Absolutely not.
Honestly, I never want to see your face again. Understand? If you're still here when I get back, I'll send the recorded video to your parents. Wait! Please, Anna, I'm really sorry.
So what?
I've reached my limit. Make sure to leave the spare key in the mailbox. If it's not there, I'll send you the picture immediately, so be prepared for that.
Ken came back and apologized again. But that wasn't enough for forgiveness. I wish I could tell him to at least pay back the money he owes first. I left him there in his half-desperate state and walked out of the room. After submitting the divorce papers at City Hall, I killed some time at a cafe. I spent about an hour pondering my next steps before returning to the condo. Apparently, the thought of his parents seeing the video of his infidelity was too much for him. Ken was not in the room when I got back. Sean found out that Ken had borrowed money from 6 other people besides us. It seems he initially intended to start a business, but it failed and he gave up. One person had even invested $100,000. He was unscrupulous in trying to recover the money. Ken, who was hiding at a friend's house, was eventually found by men hired by the creditors. It's a ridiculous story, but when he was caught, Ken was penniless. Despite having collected nearly $300,000, he had squandered it all. Online casinos. It seems he gambled everything away, hoping for a big win next time. After that, Ken was forced to work under the surveillance of his creditors. He must live a restricted life until his debts are paid off. According to Sean, who keeps in touch with the creditors, Ken is now just skin and bones. He must work hard without being able to eat properly, right? He's become so skinny, you wouldn't recognize him. Well, he brought it upon himself, right? Yes. What about Maria? What happened to her after that? She was resisting a lot. Yeah, she resisted fiercely. But in the end, she reluctantly followed what I said. She's ended up living a wretched life, just like Ken. Maria had most of her belongings taken away by Sean. Designer clothes, shoes, bags, valuables, everyday items, everything. If Maria had had any savings, it might have been a different story, but she didn't. Sean, despite her protests, took control and sold her possessions for cash. He even made her quit the beauty school and took away her family credit card and everything else. Left with nothing but the clothes on her back, Maria eventually drifted to Kyushu. There, she started working nights and, stressed out, fell into drinking, accumulating a massive debt. But that's a story for a bit later. The divorce turmoil brought Sean and me closer than ever before. I found that we really clicked. Both understand each other's emotional scars well. Initially, neither of us spoke of it, but we both sensed the mutual feelings. Later, we officially started dating and remarried 6 months later. Unexpectedly, I found myself in the position of a company CEO's wife. I love my job and have no intention of quitting, but I know I could stop any time and still be secure. The emotional scars Ken and Maria left aren't fully healed. I think there will always be moments when memories of that time make me feel awful. But even when such times come, I know Sean will always be by my side. With him there, there's nothing to fear. That's what I believe these days.
Hey! What's going on? Move your hips more.
A passionate scene unfolds in the living room at noon. Straddling my mother on all fours was my husband. Both of them are naked. I felt a powerful shock. Never did I imagine I'd witness such a moment. I feel nauseous. But I can't afford to collapse. I gathered all my strength. I could contact my grandfather immediately. The video call setup is always ready. Without being noticed by the two, who were growling like animals, I pressed the switch. Immediately, my grandfather and relatives appeared on the large screen TV, and my mother and her husband screamed. My name is Heidi, I'm 25 years old. My father, Aaron, made his fortune using the assets gifted to him by my grandfather while he was still alive. He was always cheerful, not just with me but with everyone, a rational person who approached others with calmness. There was only one time when my father lost himself in grief and sadness. It was when my biological mother, Sharon, passed away young from an illness. According to my grandfather, my father's grief was profound, and he seemed like a changed person afterward. At the time of my mother's death, I was only 2 years old. It was before I could remember, and I have virtually no memories of being with her. To me, my mother is the one I have now. My father's second wife, Margaret. When my father said he was going to remarry, my grandfather opposed it. The reason is unclear. Perhaps my grandfather had some suspicions about my new mother. She filled the gaping hole in my father's heart and stopped his flowing tears. I remember my father often saying, "It's good that Margaret came." But honestly, it was hard for me. Because my mother always treated me like a nuisance. She used to click her tongue and glare at me, saying it was difficult to take care of me because I was frail. If I acted even slightly selfish, she would hit me, and she seemed to hate even looking at me. Really annoying.
I wish you'd just accidentally fall down the stairs and break your neck.
She muttered such frightening things. When it was just her and my father, she acted like a little girl. But with me, she was completely different. In essence, she was only putting on an act in front of my father. I couldn't tell him about it. I was too scared of what my mother might do if I did, so I was paralyzed with fear. It felt unavoidable. It's difficult for any child, let alone someone as meek as me, to accuse their parents. Because of that, I always just took whatever my mother dished out. I treated almost like a slave.
Hey! Have you cleaned the living room yet? Get to it, you slacker.
Don't call me a slacker. I'll do it right now.
What's wrong with calling a slacker a slacker? If you don't like it, then hurry up and move.
All my friends' moms are so kind. Why is it different at my house? Even as a child, I wondered about this, but now I understand. My mother probably didn't care about me since she is not my biological mother. One day, the truth about my relationship with my mother came out to my father. Because I told him everything as it was. Mom keeps calling me names like slacker and slowpoke and makes me clean the room all the time. Learning this, my father was furious. "Margaret, come here," he called to my mother. It was the first time I'd seen him angry. My mother was profusely apologetic. She promised she would never be harsh to me again. "Honey, I'm sorry." I'll be kind to Heidi, so please don't be mad. But that promise was just superficial. Afterward, she continued to treat me like a slave or a servant. Her methods became more cunning, just more cautious not to get caught by my father. The way she treated me when we were alone actually became even rougher than before.
Snitching, huh? Do you even understand your place? If you speak ill of me to him again, I won't stop at just hitting you.
I was completely bound by fear of my mother. I didn't know what would happen if I defied her. It was better to just keep quiet and obey than to suffer the pain. I became more introverted, started staying in more, and began skipping school frequently. The only place I went to regularly was my grandfather's house. That's because my father would take me there. My kind grandfather was also an experienced businessman like my father. They would always talk about things I didn't understand. If something ever happened at home, I would always plan to escape to my grandfather's house. I often thought about that. My father passed away when I was in middle school. It was a car accident. It was too devastating. Because of that, I barely remember anything around the time of my father's funeral. After my father passed away, my mother's behavior completely changed. She would hurl insults at me boldly and without restraint at any time.
Can't you understand when I tell you to hurry up and make dinner? You slacker. Stop it. Please don't yell. I'll make dinner now. It's your fault for being a slacker. You're really useless.
I was utterly her servant. Day after day, she exploited me relentlessly. I think she was frustrated at that time. Because contrary to her intentions, most of my father's estate was placed under my grandfather's management. Perhaps my father knew about the issues between my mother and me. In case something happened to him, he must have discussed what to do with his assets with my grandfather in advance. At a family gathering, my grandfather spoke to my mother and me. Heidi, when you're grown up, I'll return your share according to the will. Dad, what about my share?
There's nothing specific in the will about your share, Margaret. You can manage with the assets you have, right? Then there should be no problem.
Oh, yes. That makes sense. After we returned home, my mother was furious. Why don't I have any share? She raged. She vented her resentment towards my grandfather and took her anger out on me.
You haven't been snitching to that old man, have you? No, I haven't. I don't know anything. That damn old man, just you watch. When he distributes it, I'll make sure all the property in this house becomes mine. Stupid old fool. It's only a matter of time.
My mother was like a demon. She was completely driven by greed. She came to this house for the money. I came to understand that, without anyone needing to tell me. Eventually, as an adult, I was to receive a large inheritance according to the will. But if I held on to that large sum, my mother might forcefully take it from me. After thinking it over, I connected to my grandfather's house via video call from our home. I'm not ready to use this money yet, and I'm scared to keep it. Can you hold on to it for now, Grandpa? I'll come get it when I need it. Is that so? All right. Heidi, you're a smart girl. I'll do as you say. My mother was watching this video call too. I don't think the small click of her tongue I heard wasn't my imagination. She was surely planning to somehow take the inheritance if I had accepted it outright. I breathed a sigh of relief. Despite being at home, I felt uneasy. I had normal desires for marriage like anyone else. But maybe my reserved nature was to blame. Regrettably, even after turning 20, I hadn't had a single romantic prospect. While I was sighing about it, surprisingly, my mother made an unexpected suggestion. Should I introduce you to a handsome guy? He's almost too good for you. But what does this guy do? Is he a friend of yours? A friend's son. What does he do again? I forgot. The man my mother brought was Thomas. He was 26 years old. Just as my mother said, he was quite handsome. He was also polite and interesting to talk to, and he seemed to like me. With little experience in romance, I quickly became infatuated with Thomas. And within about half a year, we got married. The ceremony was modest, as Thomas wished. I couldn't believe I was getting married. I was so happy I cried. However, as soon as we got married, Thomas's attitude changed drastically. His language became rough, and he acted arrogantly and even started smoking. He started going to casinos, slots, and racetracks, and he was debauched on a daily basis. It seemed he had been restraining himself all this time until we got married. I felt betrayed. Why? Hey, Thomas, please stop smoking. It's going to make our house smell.
If it stinks, then you clean it up. Don't nag your husband. Then could you at least quit gambling? It's like throwing money down the drain. Don't lecture me on something you've never done. You have to buy lottery tickets to win? It's the same thing.
This man is just like my mother. I felt that instinctively. He showed his true colors as soon as he achieved his goal of marrying me. His aim was probably the same as my mother's. The property left by my father. Afterward, I was treated like a maid by my mother and husband, used from morning till night. Something was off about my mother and husband's relationship. I started to feel this about 6 months after getting married. They were overly affectionate, and sometimes they would go out together. Though we were married, my relationship with my husband was in name only. I no longer loved him after he revealed his greedy nature. So honestly, I didn't care much, and it was still incredibly disgusting. They clung to each other like lovers. My mother and husband, with an age difference of about 20 years. It was mostly my mother who was smitten, grinning at him. His not-so-reluctant demeanor was unbearably unpleasant to me. My mother claimed to be a beautiful witch, and indeed, she didn't look like someone in her 40s. But of course, she couldn't compare to us in our 20s. There's only so much you can hide. One day, I felt so sickened that I couldn't stand it anymore, and I confronted them.
Can you please not be all over each other here? It's disgusting.
What's so disgusting about it? Heidi, you've been rather cheeky lately. My bad, I'll hold back. But it's hard when Margaret won't let go.
It's because Thomas is so handsome, isn't it? Really, sweetie?
My mother and husband playfully clinging to each other. It's unbearable to watch. The atmosphere between them was unmistakably that of lovers. I was always curious where the two of them went when they went out together. I don't regret hiring a detective agency to look into it. I learned a lot about my mother and husband, and I was able to figure out what I should do next. However, the emotional damage was significant. Reading the investigation report completely knocked me down. I felt so unwell that I had to retreat to my room and rest for a while. Finding certain documents in my husband's room the day before also contributed to my mental unrest. That day was the 3rd anniversary of my paternal aunt's death. Relatives were gathering at my grandfather's house. But there was no way I could go in such a condition. I contacted my grandfather and asked to be excused. The investigation report revealed only shocking truths. There were many hard-to-accept facts. What should I do now? How should I confront them and fight back? While pondering these thoughts, I had fallen asleep. I was awakened by a noise about an hour later. From the living room, I could hear fierce voices like growling beasts. It seemed my mother had returned with my husband. It was not a fight. This was it.
Hey! What's going on? Move your hips more. A passionate scene unfolded in the living room during the day.
Straddling my mother on all fours was my husband. Both of them were naked. I felt a powerful sense of dizziness. Never did I imagine I'd witness such a moment. They probably thought I was at the memorial service at my grandfather's house. What a horrifying sight. Though technically in-laws, they were parent and child. I felt nauseous, but I couldn't afford to collapse. I mustered all my strength. I secretly called my grandfather to set up as usual. The video call setup was ready to go, as always. Unaware and still growling like animals were my mother and husband. Without them noticing, I gently pressed the switch. Immediately afterward, my grandfather and relatives appeared on the large screen TV. My mother's screams echoed in the living room. The shock was evident on the faces of my grandfather and relatives too. No wonder. My grandfather was supposed to be on a video call with me. He certainly wasn't expecting to see his naked daughter-in-law and son-in-law appear. I felt terribly sorry for exposing them to such a distressing scene. What's this? What's going on here? What are you two doing?
It's not what it looks like. Please believe me.
I don't understand. Both of you, just put your clothes on now.
What the heck is this? Why is this happening all of a sudden?
My mother, still naked, fled behind the sofa. Our eyes met as I stood there. Her expression quickly turned to one of anger. But I wasn't planning to just stand there and take it anymore. I grabbed clothes that had been discarded nearby and threw them at my mother. Why don't you go to the other room and put these on? You look disgraceful. Thomas, you too.
Heidi. How dare you embarrass me like this? You think you're gonna get away with this? That's my line. First of all, shouldn't you be embarrassed by what you're doing? Sleeping with your mother-in-law, of all things. How could you even do such a thing? Shut up. Just be quiet.
My husband quickly grabbed clothes and disappeared into the next room. My mother also sneaked away, and the living room suddenly went quiet. My grandfather and the relatives were still in shock. I apologized to everyone via the screen. I'm sorry for suddenly showing you such a disgraceful scene. Heidi, tell us. Have those two always been involved like this? Grandpa, I'm sorry I didn't say anything sooner. Yes, it's true. They've always been overly affectionate at home, too. They've never been this blatant about it, though. Really? What in the world? My mother and husband had indulged in such acts, likely because they mistakenly thought I had gone out to the memorial service. When I mentioned this, my grandfather let out a huge sigh. Unbelievable, he muttered, his expression troubled. Anyway, I'm coming over right now. Heidi, I'm worried about you. Yes, please. As soon as you can. Also, I'll send the data from the report I had the detective agency prepare. Grandpa, please take a look at it when you can. A detective agency? Heidi, you had to do all this on your own? I'm sorry I didn't notice sooner. I'll be there immediately, just wait for me. Thank you, Grandpa. I ended the video call. The die was cast. There was no turning back now. When I turned around, my mother and husband were standing at the entrance to the living room. Both of them were glaring at me with fierce looks. I glared back just as intensely. I was no longer the compliant child I once was. I have to fight for my life on my own terms. I'm determined to fight thoroughly and exclude these two from my life. That was my strong resolve. My mother walked towards me aggressively. I kept the same distance from her. I don't like violence. Is that okay? I asked, and she stopped. Okay? What do you mean? Do you have something you want to say? I know everything now. About you and Thomas. I got curious, so I had everything checked out thoroughly using a detective agency. Didn't you notice until now? You investigated? Sneaking around investigating your own mother, what a strange thing to do. Are you crazy? Doing whatever you want. It seems like you were doing a lot of things that shouldn't be found out, weren't you? I too was shocked to learn the truth. So much so that it made me physically ill and I had to lie down. At the same time, I was incredibly angry. It's fair to say that anger made up the bulk of my feelings. Tell the truth. Mom, Thomas, you're both part of a fraud group, aren't you? Huh? What are you talking about? Have you been watching too many dramas or something? Don't play dumb. I told you I've done my research. Would I say this without proof? When I glared, my mother clammed up with a serious face. From the beginning, my mother only approached my father, who had lost his first wife, my biological mother, for his money. Perhaps my father had some understanding of my mother's true intentions. Perhaps my father understood my mother's true intentions to some extent and still chose to be with her. Let me guess, you planned to take all the money from me too, right? You wanted to take over all of Dad's inheritance. But then you couldn't because of his weird will. That's right. Because of that strange will, the inheritance came under old man's management. You, having come of age and inherited it, got scared of handling all that money and let old man manage it.
Don't call Grandpa an old man. Quiet. It's none of your business how I refer to him.
My mother spat on the floor. It seems my decision to rely on my grandfather was correct. If the money had been under my control, who knows what would have become of it? It would have been ripped off by my mother and husband long ago and spent. In fact, the cash in the accounts, the securities, and other assets, excluding real estate, had already been tampered with. The numerous antiques and collectibles that my father had amassed as a hobby. My father's collection room was now completely empty. My mother and husband had sold everything off through online auctions. My father's belongings had been completely scattered. I glared at my mother and asked, "What did you use the money from selling Dad's collection for?" "Why should I have to tell you that?" "They were spent on gambling. We circulated the money. Antiques, no one in this house knew its value anyway. It was more beneficial to sell them, right?" "That's just selfish. You just wanted money to play around with, didn't you?" When I glared, my husband shrugged with a mocking expression. He was mocking me. He thought I couldn't do anything. I decided first to separate my mother and husband. As I said before, I've already found out that you two are part of a fraud group. The investigator was even shocked. They suggested reporting you. Report? Did you report us? Not yet. Thomas, it seems like your father is also part of the fraud group. Mom introduced you to me as the son of an acquaintance. Your father is an acquaintance because he's part of the same fraud group, right?
How much have you looked into? Do you have undeniable evidence? What do you know about my dad? Hey, tell me.
Thomas, my mother shouted. She didn't want him to say too much. Compared to my mother, Thomas was still easier to handle. I deliberately maintained a strong demeanor. It was 2 against 1, and I was at a disadvantage. Still, I needed to appear as if I was in a position of advantage. Otherwise, they might seize any moment of weakness to overpower me. What? You want to protect your dad? Then answer my questions. Depending on your answers, I might only report Mom to the police and let you and your dad off the hook. Thomas. Don't be fooled. Heidi is planning to go to the police in the end anyway. Plus, if one of us gets caught, the rest will follow. Thomas, what will you do? Do you trust me?
Look, I never wanted to sleep with this old lady.
Unexpected words burst out. My mother was shocked. Thomas's face looked like he was about to cry. He stepped back from my mother, pointing at her and yelling. It's true. To me, she's just an old lady. But she's a friend of my dad's, respected among our group, and too intimidating to cross. So, I just...
What are you saying? Thomas, you told me you liked me. What the heck? You forced me to say it. Under duress. I've hated this all along. An old woman's flirting makes me sick. Thomas, I will never forgive you. I'll have the guys beat you up.
Guys likely referred to members of the fraud group. I had successfully induced infighting. Still, I felt awful. These two were just too vile. They lived in a reality far removed from any common decency.
Heidi, I'm with you. Let's kick this old woman out together.
That's kind of you. And while we're at it, could you tell me in your own words? You and my mom have been part of the fraud group all along, right? You came here just for the money? That's right. The initial plan was to exploit the vulnerability of your dad after he lost his first wife. Margaret played it well.
Hey, hey, hey. Thomas, stop. Don't blabber unnecessary things.
But by then, my mother could no longer stop my husband from talking. He spilled everything about how they were major players in a large fraud group, how the parents were high-ranking members. A part of the money made from selling my father's collection had been paid as tribute to their organization. Thomas voluntarily continued to disclose various other things before I even asked. And we even had a plan to eliminate you, Heidi. What? Eliminate me? Yeah, it's a common method in our group. Make it look like an accident. Can't you see I'm telling you to stop? She's trying to make me spill everything. You're probably recording this, aren't you? Huh? It was out. Yes, I had been recording secretly. My smartphone was on, with the voice recorder app active. Considering the quiet in the living room, I was confident the recording would be clear. My mother glared at me. But I was past the point of backing down or apologizing. I was ready to resist with all my might, and if attacked, I was sure to fight back. I wasn't about to lose. And through this conversation, it became all too clear. My mother is a handful, but I feel like I can manage Thomas. I decided to further unsettle Thomas with my next move. Thomas, I need to apologize to you for something. What? What is it? I went into your room without permission and read the documents you had filed there. What? Seriously? What did you do that for? That's why I always told you to lock your room. You idiot. Don't you have any sense of crisis? That's the problem with young people these days. The documents in Thomas's room were related to fraud. They detailed the fraud schemes and methods that the group had successfully executed. It was highly organized and systematic. Reading it made me feel sick. Con artists like them have no conscience. It's despicable to deceive people for profit. They took advantage of my father's sorrow and my naivety to try to take over our house from the inside. There's one more thing I absolutely can't forgive. In fact, the anger about that matter is what's been driving me lately. About my father? How he died. What? My father. It was a car accident. That was your doing, wasn't it? Just like Thomas had mentioned earlier. Making it look like an accident is a common tactic for them. In fact, it was clearly written in the documents in Thomas's room. The death of my father was part of their group's plan. My mother suddenly started laughing. It was a disgusting, infuriating laugh to hear.
Yes. Our group did it. But what can you do about it now? It's already been dealt with as an accident. That's despicable. Shame on you.
Say whatever you like. Now, shall we ask you to be quiet? You're the one who should be quiet, Margaret. My mother's eyes widened. Standing at the entrance to the living room was my grandfather. He had driven here as fast as he could. His timing couldn't have been better. Grandfather looked furious. He must have heard our conversation, which would explain why. It's clear now. Because of what you did, my son lost his life. No, I mean, I didn't directly do anything myself.
It's the same thing. Don't move, Thomas.
Yes, sir. Thomas trembled under my grandfather's stern command. Just as he tried to escape, it was as if he had been struck by lightning. Seeing the truth about his son's death, my grandfather's face turned red with anger. Grandfather is well-built and vigorous, showing no signs of aging. He would definitely overpower Thomas. It was questionable whether my mother and Thomas together could take him on. Now, we clearly had the upper hand. To my frightened mother and Thomas, my grandfather shouted like a demon. Sit down. Both of you. I'm calling the police right now. And don't even think about escaping. Even if you try, I'll make sure you get caught.
No! Please, not the police!
What, you have something to hide? If you've done nothing wrong, then act like it. Are you admitting to being fraudsters right here?
I'm truly sorry. Please, just don't call the police. I'll do anything, Grandpa.
Finally, my mother knelt on the floor. She clasped her hands together, looking like she was about to cry as she begged my grandfather. My mother, known for her fierce temper and high pride, was admitting defeat. It was a declaration of her defeat. It seemed she had realized she couldn't win against grandfather and me. My mother repeatedly expressed her remorse, begging not to call the police, promising to sell out information. I'll tell you the names of the leaders of the group. I'll tell you all their hideouts. I'll give you every detail about their methods, who they're targeting next, everything. Just.
So, you want us to let you go? Don't be ridiculous. You think you can bargain? You're a century too early for that. But, Thomas, what are you doing? You apologize too. I'm truly sorry. I won't upset Heidi anymore. I won't commit any more fraud. Please forgive us.
Mother and Thomas both rubbed their foreheads on the floor. I saw no value in their prostration. Grandfather seemed to feel the same. With narrowed eyes, he glared at them, barked to keep their mouths shut.
You and all your accomplices, I'll make sure you all end up in prison. Think of all the people who have suffered because of you. Don't think you can save yourselves.
Cries echoed in the living room during the day. Those were the cries of my mother and Thomas. How pathetic. It marked the end of the long-standing dominion my mother and Thomas had over this house. That day, grandfather made Thomas sign the divorce papers, setting me free. I also cut ties with my mother, finally gaining my freedom for the first time. Later, my former mother and former husband were arrested and charged. The statutory penalty for fraud is up to 10 years in prison. A conviction would definitely result in a prison sentence. If it became clear that they had deliberately taken my father's life, my former mother's sentence would surely be even heavier. Personally, I wish they would stay in prison for life. That's honestly how I felt. When the sentence was confirmed, both my former mother and former husband cried bitterly. It was the retribution for the pain they caused. I want them to fully pay for their crimes. My former mother and former husband were definitely members of a fraud group. It seems there are many across the nation who have suffered at the hands of their group. The evidence I provided to the police made their activities clear. The documents were full of detailed accounts of the frauds and their malicious methods. These led to the eventual crackdown on the entire group, which was quite surprising. All I wanted was to avenge my father's death, but I unexpectedly contributed to eradicating the fraud group. If this helps reduce the number of people suffering from fraud, then I find it truly gratifying. While my former mother and former husband were incarcerated, I met a trustworthy man. It was my grandfather who introduced him. He is a young salesperson working for the company my grandfather, a businessman, runs. He is capable, cheerful, promising for the future, and also handsome, a wonderful person indeed. Due to my former mother, a fraudster, I had constantly endured unpleasant experiences. But from now on, things will be different. I am determined to pursue my own happiness and live every day with a smile. I told my Father in heaven and my real mother to watch over me.